Miriam had always tried to be kind, but everyone at her son's wedding party kept calling her just the mother-in-law, as if her name and her stories did not matter at all to them that day. She smiled every time they spoke that phrase, yet behind the smile her heart wobbled like jelly on a spoon, because she had worked so hard to make the day perfect for them. That fluttered inside her chest. She had polished the silverware, pressed the table linen, and filled tiny jars with rose petals, thinking each task would show her love shining brighter than any candle in the hall. Still, whenever guests thank someone, they thank the bride, the groom, or the planner, never the middle-aged woman smoothing wrinkles from the cloth before anyone even saw them, even though her fingers were sore and smelled like lemon soap. The bride's aunt even laughed lightly and said, "Let the young ones handle the speeches. The mother-in-law has surely talked enough in her life," not knowing Miriam had practiced gentle words for weeks. Miriam swallowed the soft speech she had shaped like a paper boat ready to sail, feeling it crumple in her throat before it could float across the room full of bright lights. She remembered her own wedding decades earlier when her mother-in-law called her by name, held her hands, and said, "Welcome, daughter," gifting her a tiny ring that still lived in a red velvet box. That memory grew like a warm candle flame inside her chest, and she wondered if anyone here would remember her kindness years later when gray streaks touched their hair, or if they would only recall the flavor of the chocolate cake. As pictures were taken, she stood slightly behind the couple, trying to hold the long veil so it would not drag, yet the photographer kept asking her to step aside to keep the frame neat. She stepped aside, though her heart begged to belong inside the picture, beside her son whom she had sunk to sleep in storms and fed bowls of soup when fevers burned bright. Her son, busy shaking hands and laughing, rarely turned to meet her eyes, and she told herself he was nervous, not uncaring, though the doubt scratched like sand under her thoughts. A little cousin tugged at her sleeve and whispered that the seats were full, and could the mother-in-law stand at the back, which felt like being told to stand outside a garden she had planted. She nodded, but frost seemed to creep up her spine even in the air-conditioned room, and she wrapped her shawl tighter as if it could protect her from cold words. Music started, lively and bright, the kind of tune that usually made her hum while watering herbs, yet the beat echoed hollowly, sounding more like shoes dropping in an empty hallway. When the cake knife was passed around for signatures, the groom signed first, then the bride, then their friends, but the planner moved on before Miriam could add her gentle looped signature. She felt like a ghost wandering a party, unseen unless someone needed a chair pulled closer or a napkin folded again, and ghosts, she thought, do not belong in daylight celebrations. Her phone buzzed with a message from her neighbor asking if the garden roses had been watered, and suddenly she wished she were home among the flowers that never questioned her worth. She typed back that all was well, adding a smiley face even though her eyes shimmered, and she almost pressed send, then realized the hall had no signal, and the message stayed unsent like her speech. The DJ invited parents to dance, yet only the bride's parents were called by name, while she was invited in a group phrase that sounded like leftovers scraped onto a plate after dinner. She stepped onto the dance floor anyway and tried a gentle sway, but guests were busy filming the happy couple, so she stepped back before her tears could show up in anyone's video. She remembered knitting the pale blue sweater her son wore when he first said "Mama," the yarn soft as baby breath, and she felt that memory tuck itself around her shoulders now. A waiter passed by with sparkling drinks, and when she reached for one, he smiled politely yet turned away as another guest, younger and louder, called for 2 glasses first. She told herself it was okay, that mothers live to serve, not to be served, but the thought tasted bitter like over-steeped tea left too long in the pot. Across the room, 2 teenagers giggled and whispered that the mother-in-law looked so serious, maybe she should cheer up or sit down, and their words fluttered into her ears like cold moth wings. She took a deep breath, smelling roses, sugar, and a hint of polish, and wondered why a place could be so full of sweet things and still feel lonely. She thought about the word lonely and felt it settle like a pebble in her pocket. The bride tossed her bouquet toward a crowd, and Miriam's hands moved on their own, catching a single petal, which she folded inside her palm as though it were a private secret. She wanted to slip away already, but tradition said mothers stay until the last blessing, so she stood near a pillar painted ivory and watched the minutes drip like slow honey. Someone announced that the getaway car was ready, shining with ribbons, and guests hurried outside. While she lingered to pick up a dropped glove, nobody noticed. She placed the glove on a chair so its owner might find it and feel less lost than she did, then glanced around and realized she was suddenly alone with plates waiting to be cleared. In that hush, she heard the soft hum of the ceiling fan, and it felt like the only voice telling her she mattered, because it still turned for her when no one else looked. Her purse rested under the gift table, small and plain, holding her wallet, her keys, and a tiny photo of her husband who had passed away 5 years earlier after promising to dance at this wedding. She touched the photo through the purse fabric, feeling its corners, and imagined her husband standing there saying, "Miriam, come home, tea is ready," in the warm voice that always made the world gentle. Tears pricked again, but she blinked them away, deciding that if the world did not need her here, perhaps her own kitchen and her late evening garden did. She checked the hallway. No one was looking, and she walked toward the exit with careful steps, the petals still hidden in her fist like a tiny compass pointing outward into tomorrow. The hall doors opened with a quiet sigh, letting a night air filled with cricket songs, and the coolness wrapped around her like a friend taking her arm in silent support. Streetlights painted pools on the sidewalk, and she stepped between them, feeling like a traveler hopping stones across a dark stream. Behind her, the music swelled as the car pulled away with cheers, yet she kept walking, not angry, just emptied, like a well after a long dry summer waiting for rain. She reached the bus stop, and a stray dog wagged its tail, so she scratched its head and whispered, "Someone sees me," and the dog sat beside her without asking her title. A bus arrived, doors swinging open with a hiss, and she climbed aboard, dropping coins into the slot, then chose a seat by the window where city lights slid by like tiny fireworks across dark velvet. As the bus rolled forward, she opened her palm, looked at the crushed petal under the dim light, and decided she would press it in her favorite book to remember that leaving can also be an act of love. Miriam watched the dark city race past the window, each street lamp flicking across her face like tiny flashbulbs, and she wondered if her son would notice she was gone before the honeymoon flight lifted into the clouds tonight. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, counting the glowing shop signs for comfort the way she once counted her boy's even breaths when he slept through winter fevers, tracing routes like secret trails. In her lap lay the small purse, and inside it the photo and the folded petal, reminders that love could fit inside simple things even when grand halls seemed too crowded to hold it, sewn with quiet hope. The bus rocked over a pothole, and Miriam gripped the seat rail, thinking how life also jarred a person without warning. Yet most people just kept their balance and moved on, shaking loose old memories. A sleepy child in the row ahead peeked between the seats, saw her gentle smile, and waved, and the tiny gesture soothed her spirit more than 100 polite speeches could have, bright as hidden sunbeams. Miriam waved back, imagining how that child might tell their mother about the nice lady on the bus, proving kindness can travel farther than any limousine, a tale traded by smiles. The driver called out the next stop in a tired voice, and she rose, steadying herself, because this was the corner near her street lined with neem trees and shy alley cats, is called gravelly and warm. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, night air brushed her cheeks, and she breathed deep, tasting fried samosa scent from a cart and feeling alive in a way silk tablecloths never allowed, richer than any dessert. She walked past shuttered stores, her shoes tapping a simple beat, and every sound felt honest, not like ballroom echoes that had hidden snickers behind perfect music, music too polished to ring true. At her gate she paused, seeing the familiar blue paint peeling, and she thought the chip marks looked like small islands on a map leading her back to herself, pointing her heart home. She pushed the gate, and its hinge squeaked a welcome home, sweeter to her ears than the band's loud trumpet blast had been, echoing childhood laughter. In the front yard, the rose bushes she had planted for her husband swayed under moonlight, and droplets from the evening watering still clung like silver beads on each petal, guarding whispered promises. Miriam stooped to touch a bloom, comparing its scent to the crushed wedding petal in her purse, and decided a living flower felt kinder than anything caught in glass vases under bright glare, a kindness taught by the moon. Inside the house, she turned on one lamp, and warm yellow light washed across old photos on the wall. Pictures where her son hugged her without cameramen telling them to move apart, each frame glowing softly. She kicked off her heels, slipping into soft slippers, and felt relief spread through her toes, as though every ignored moment at the wedding had been stored in those tight shoes, loosening knots in her tired mind. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle, set it to boil, and the gentle hum reminded her of lullabies she once hummed while waiting for baby bottles to warm, steam whispering like cozy ghosts. While the water heated, she opened her purse, laid the photo of her husband on the table, and beside it placed the flattened rose petal like a bridge between past promise and present choice, joining past and present hands. Steam curled from the spout, whispering against the window, and she poured hot water over mint leaves, letting fresh scent rise like forgiveness after a hard day, rising like kind ghosts from the cup. She carried the cup to the living room, settled into her favorite chair, and wrapped a knitted shawl around her shoulders, the same shawl she had planned to wear during the mother-son dance that never happened, curling around her like a hug made of yarn. For a moment silence rested in the house, soft and deep, and she realized silence listened to her thoughts, whereas the crowded hall had only talked over them, calm as a library at dusk. She pictured her son's happy face earlier, bright as festival lights, and she felt no anger toward him, only a small ache that hoped someday he would see the quiet corners of love she offered, as if hope tiptoed inside. Miriam sipped tea, and the warmth slid down into her chest, melting the cold pebble of loneliness she had carried since the first guest called her just the mother-in-law, a pebble warming into sand. She reached for a notebook kept on the side table, opened to a clean page, and clicked a pen, deciding to write a letter, not of blame, but of stories he had forgotten to hear, small clicks echoing in the quiet. In neat loops, she wrote about his first step in the backyard. We tottered toward her roses and laughed as petals brushed his cheeks like butterfly wings, as gentle as summer rain. She wrote about nights spent sewing costumes for school plays, and mornings practicing math tables while flipping pancakes shaped like stars, each memory proof of love's everyday work, memories bright like carnival lights. Sentence after sentence flowed, simple and clear, because she wanted the letter to sound like her voice reading bedtime stories long ago, spilling over paper edges. When her hand tired, she paused, counting pages, surprised at how quickly love filled paper once it was given space, budding like spring flowers. She left room at the end for a new memory still to come, a promise that their bond could grow if both tended it like a garden, windows breathing out relief. Placing the pen down, she felt lighter, the way a house feels after clutter is cleared and fresh air moves through open windows, the ink drying like morning dew. She folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote his name with care, as if each stroke of ink smoothed the bruise on her heart, sealing tomorrow inside. Beside the envelope, she set the pressed petal, deciding to tape it inside the letter so he could see the moment she chose hope over hurt, drums still beating faintly in her ears. A knock startled her. It was only the wall clock changing hours, but the sound nudged her to glance at the late time and think of the wedding crowd still dancing miles away, watering their future with words. She whispered a soft blessing for the couple, asking that they never forget to call each other by name, because names are small gifts we give every day, like packing sunshine for the road. Then she went to the hallway closet, pulled out a small suitcase, and began placing clothes for a trip she had delayed since her husband's passing, socks rolled tight like tiny clouds. The suitcase felt light, yet inside it she put sturdy walking shoes, a notebook, and the envelope, for she planned to hand it to her son upon her return, after reflections cleared, half hidden under tamarind branches. Miriam locked the house, left extra food for the alley cats, and stepped back into the night ready for the early train that left before dawn toward the seaside town her husband had loved, each bump shaking off sadness. On the quiet street, a rickshaw waited, as if summoned by her wish, and the driver nodded without questions when she asked for the station, respecting the hush around her plan, glowing like tiny candles. As the rickshaw rattled away, she looked up at stars shining unbothered by fancy halls, and she felt like one of them, small yet bright in her own sky, labels shrinking into dust. She thought of the label, just the mother-in-law, and laughed softly, because under these stars. The railway station glowed orange with dawn as Miriam smelled sweet chai, while vendors in wool caps stacked bread on carts beside drifting curls of wood smoke, and a stray cat twined around passengers' ankles hunting crumbs. She bought a ticket with coins that clicked like bells, and the clerk slid it under dusty glass, wishing her a safe trip as the fluorescent light above them buzzed softly like a sleepy bee. A wide blue train hissed to a stop, metal sides gleaming, and Miriam stepped onto the steel stair, hugging her shawl so it would not whip away in the swift breath of arriving wind that smelled faintly of iron. Inside, she chose a window seat, slid her suitcase beneath it, and sighed with relief that the cabin smelled of fresh paper and cardamom buns instead of heavy perfume, a scent that always made her nose sting. An elderly woman with silver hair under a red scarf asked if the seat was free, and when Miriam nodded, she sat, smoothing her dress with gentle, steady hands that bore faint scars from long-ago garden work. She introduced herself as Bilquis, traveling to the seaside town of Seabreeze to greet a new grandchild, her smile carving sun-shaped wrinkles around bright eyes that sparkled like lanterns after rain. Bilquis noticed the envelope peeking from Miriam's purse and said she loved letters because they carried voices safely across miles, and Miriam felt warmth bloom inside like a hidden candle. The train lurched forward, city rooftops sliding past the window like pages in a picture book someone could not turn fast enough, while distant horns stitched a rhythm beneath the rattling wheels. A vendor wobbled through with a tray of steaming tea glasses, and Miriam bought two, giving one to Bilquis, who laughed that shared tea quickly turns strangers into friends before the steam can fade. Miriam sipped the sugary brew, and its warmth eased the tight ache left by all the words she had swallowed at the wedding, melting sorrow like ice in sunlight and sweetening her pulse. When Bilquis asked her destination, Miriam explained she was going to the sea to honor promises made with her late husband beside rolling waves and to find a path back to herself. The older woman nodded, saying the ocean scrubs stories clean and leaves only the parts worth keeping, and Miriam tucked that thought into her heart like a pearl inside a shell. Factories faded and green fields appeared, morning light turning the grass gold, while birds burst upward at the whistle's cry, scattering like confetti over the wide rooftops of the world. The train slowed near a dusty village where children chased the cars waving cloth flags, and Miriam's answering wave felt like a cheer bouncing back into her lonely chest. She wondered if those kids would someday recall the lady on the train, just as she still remembered her own first ride when moonlit water flashed beyond rice paddies and hope fluttered like a banner. Bilquis unwrapped sesame biscuits from a cloth and shared one, and Miriam thought its humble sweetness outshone every fancy dessert from last night's glittering haul by a whole galaxy. They chatted about gardens, cooking, and bedtime tales, while the wheels clacked beneath them like drums keeping time for their small concert of friendly, hopeful words. During a long stretch between stops, Miriam opened her notebook and wrote down the color of sunrise and the whistle's cry, hoping to share those sparks of wonder with her son when the right day came. Bilquis watched and said people who bottle beauty keep the world bright like lantern keepers on ancient walls, and Miriam sat taller beneath the praise as if someone straightened her invisible crown. The conductor checked tickets and bowed deeply, offering more respect in one simple nod than any wedding guest had shown, proving manners outshine titles the way dawn outshines a lamp. The train crossed a broad river, and Miriam pressed her forehead to the glass, watching silver ripples glimmer like fish scales beneath the quickening sun and hearing gulls cry in her imagination. Memories of fishing trips with her husband rose like bubbles, his laugh echoing off the boat, her son clapping each splash, and the memory settled around her shoulders like a warm blanket. A loudspeaker announced a short breakfast stop ahead, and Bilquis urged Miriam to stretch, joking that stiff legs hide tears in their joints, so a brisk walk shakes sadness loose. On the platform, Miriam bought mango slices dusted with salt and chili, and the sharp, bright taste woke her better than coffee, flooding her mind with memories of schoolyard summers. Back inside, she offered a slice to a shy student who was reading notes, and the girl said good luck tastes nicer when shared, words Miriam stored in her heart like glitter in a jar. The student asked Miriam's work, and she replied that she grew roses and kindness, prompting a grin and the remark that such labor must smell sweet every morning. Thick clouds towered ahead, lightning flickered like camera flashes at some distant party, yet inside the carriage everyone stayed calm, trusting the sturdy roof above. Rain tapped the roof in steady applause, and passengers settled into reading or dreams while Miriam listened, thinking the watery music praised every quiet heart still beating. Bilquis dozed, her head resting on Miriam's shoulder, and Miriam felt honored to be a pillow, proof that comfort moves both ways between travelers and needs no formal invitation. She watched raindrops race down the glass, laughing when two merged and tumbled together, teaching her that partnership can turn every contest into a joyful dance. The train entered a tunnel, lights flicked on, and Miriam noticed every passenger calm, proof that shared darkness feels shorter when hope pools around small bulbs. They burst back into blue sky, and the coastline now shimmered like silver lace on the horizon, promising salty breezes that could sweep stale regret off her shoulders, and the scent of salt reached her even through the glass. Miriam's heart quickened at the sight. She pressed her husband's photo to the window and whispered that the sea had kept their plan safe, the way friends guard secrets. Bilquis awoke, clapped softly, and said first sight of ocean can make old trees bloom, words Miriam stored like rainwater in a clay jar for the garden of tomorrow. They packed their bags as the speaker named Seabreeze, and Miriam's hands trembled with the thrill of stepping into a blank page she alone could color, a story that would not be edited by anyone else. She helped Bilquis lift a heavy bag, and they laughed at their joined strength, a fresh friendship stronger than ribbons that tie wedding favors and certainly more useful. Brakes squealed like playful crows, salty winds slipped through the open door, carrying the cry of distant gulls, and Miriam inhaled freedom deep into her grateful lungs. On the platform, they exchanged addresses pinned on biscuit paper, and Miriam felt glad knowing there was another mailbox ready to welcome her unfolding stories. They hugged. Bilquis whispered that brave journeys start with small steps, then melted into a crowd of laughing relatives, leaving Miriam glowing with fresh courage. Miriam squared her shoulders and rolled her suitcase toward the sea road, ready to discover what blooms when old labels are gently set aside and new days are watered by hope. Miriam rolled her suitcase along the wooden boardwalk beneath bright sun, each plank drumming her steps toward the thin blue line where the sea and sky touched like friends shaking hands. Salt air tasted like chips on her tongue, and the playful breeze combed her hair while gulls looped overhead, their cries cheering her on even though she had never visited this town before. She spotted a mint-green guest house with white shutters. The owner, a cheerful uncle with pepper beard, said a top-floor room facing the waves had just opened, as if the tide itself saved it for her. Setting down her bag, she placed the envelope and her husband's photo on the windowsill and promised aloud that every vow he left unfinished would be planted here like a seed waiting for sunrise. She opened the window, sunlight flooding the quilt and drying the last train-shed tears, turning them into tiny crystals that clung to her lashes before drifting away on the warm wind. After washing her face, she tied her shawl like a cape and strolled the street past shops painted with dolphins and shells. Every passerby returned her smile without asking for title or reason. At a grill stand, she bought corn dripping butter and remembered feeding the treat to her toddler at summer fairs. Memories sweet as honey even after the years stacked like tall towers behind her. Kids raced bikes along the curb, teasing about who could pedal fastest, and Miriam laughed when one nearly tipped but recovered, proof that roads forgive brave hearts and cheer for second chances. A weathered sign pointed toward the pier. She followed it, pockets holding coins, a room key, and small courage that grew louder with every roar of water against the distant wooden posts. The pier groaned beneath her sandals as she leaned over the railing to watch silver fish weaving between barnacled posts like quick needles stitching bright thread through dark cloth. The young artist sat cross-legged with charcoal pad and offered to add her outline to his seascape. She agreed, trading a coin and the story of a midnight bus for a picture that breathed silent hope. When he handed over the sheet, she saw herself drawn steady and forward-facing, and she thanked him because sometimes art shows our shape of courage clearer than any mirror or crowded speech. She folded the sketch and slid it behind the photo on her sill, planning to show her son one day that his mother did not vanish but stood stronger whenever life tried to push her aside. A stall nearby sold tiny bottles layered with colored sands from different coasts. She bought one, thinking love also stacks hues from many days into a single shining memory we can hold in our palm. When the tide receded, it revealed pools like jewel boxes. She knelt to watch crabs shuffle, marveling how creatures wore hard shells yet still moved with delicate grace across wet stone. A girl in yellow overalls crouched beside her, squealing at a starfish. Miriam shared her corn and listened to the child explain a dream of becoming a scientist who would guard every shore. Miriam said good dreams grow like seaweed in clear water, and the girl promised to study hard. Her father thanked Miriam, saying strangers can spark bright stars in young minds. The sun climbed higher, painting paths of liquid gold across the water, and warmth slid to her shoulders, loosening knots left by ballroom lights and careless words. She walked along the beach collecting smooth pebbles shaped like hearts, moons, and teardrops, planning to spell a new message on her nightstand. One word revealed each sunrise. By noon, she reached an open library box beside a bench. She traded her travel magazine for a thin book of simple sea poems, guessing they would sing nicely as bedtime rhythms. She read one poem aloud about patient shells listening to storms and realized it matched her journey, teaching that quiet hearts store power until the right tide carries their voice. A lifeguard in red applauded and shared sunscreen, saying the coast loves guests who respect its gifts. Miriam dabbed lotion and promised to leave only footprints. A banner announced a kite festival tomorrow, and Miriam decided to stay, eager to watch the sky filled with bright shapes dancing without tickets or reserved rows. Back at the guest house, she brewed jasmine tea and filled her notebook with descriptions of fish scales, starfish arms, and the girl in yellow, eager to share these cheerful fragments someday. She sketched a tide pool in pencil and discovered that drawing slowed her breath, lining thoughts like shells and tidy rows and teaching the calm value of gentle order. The owner knocked with fresh towels and seeing her sketchbook, asked to display one page in the lobby. She agreed, happy to trade art for goodwill, a currency lighter than coins. Soft clouds rolled over the sun, dimming colors to pearl, yet Miriam felt no gloom, because even muted light was kinder than chandeliers that once glared at her in the wedding hall. She tucked the letter envelope inside her journal so new pages could hug it, and she checked that the pressed petal still lay safe, guiding her choices like a tiny compass. In the evening, she visited a pier cafe and ordered tomato soup with basil leaves floating like little boats. Each spoonful warmed her voice until an old lullaby slipped from her lips. The waitress knew the tune and sang the next line. Other diners followed, their soft chorus floating over the tide and teaching Miriam that shared songs need no rehearsal. Sunset painted the horizon pink, orange, and purple, and everyone paused to watch, phones forgotten, proving beauty commands respect without titles or gold frames. Miriam snapped one photo for her son but stored most of the sunset in her memory, trusting that living colors last longer inside the heart than on glowing screens. When the first evening star appeared, she offered a wish. May her son's ears stay open to voices softer than applause, and may his eyes see love in every quiet corner. Later, she joined travelers trading stories around a lantern. She listened to mountain hikes, desert nights, and city parades before sharing her tale of a single petal and the silent bus ride. Eyes glistened, and one traveler admitted her courage tasted like sea wind, nudging him to call his own mother, and the words landed on Miriam's heart like a gentle wave of fresh respect. Returning to her room, she saw her reflection in the hall mirror, the shawl draped like a banner of quiet strength, and her eyes shone like embers ready to start new fires of kindness. She set the sea poem book on the table, slid the sketch under its cover to flatten, and placed a heart-shaped pebble by the lamp so morning light would greet a solid promise of love. She opened the window, moonlight spilling across the quilt like silver water, and whispered that labels are sand castles. One tide can wash them away and leave space for something true. With that thought, she slipped under lavender-scented covers, the distant surf applauding her leap into tomorrow, and felt, at last, like the author of her own story instead of a side note. Sleep came gently, carrying dreams of kites, new friends, and a sun opening a letter scented with sea salt and pressed petals, proof that goodbyes can bloom into bright beginnings. Morning sunlight woke Miriam early, and she hurried to the window, smiling as bright gulls traced loops above the glowing sea, which whispered promises of another friendly day filled with open skies. She dressed in soft cotton, slipped the letter and pressed petal into her pocket for luck, and stepped outside where the boardwalk already buzzed with vendors rolling carts toward the festival field. A brass band practiced near the pier, and a lively tune made her sandals tap a gentle beat while colorful kites lay asleep in neat bundles waiting for the first breeze to lift them. Children in bright shirts rushed by with rolls of string, their laughter bubbling like soap suds in sunshine and racing farther than their quick feet. Miriam found a stall selling blank paper kites and bought one sky blue triangle, deciding she would paint her own story upon it rather than choose a design decided by someone else. She borrowed brushes and simple paints from a kind artist who said new friends are the best colors, then sat on the warm sand and thought quietly about what picture should fly above her head. First, she painted a tiny house with a garden, then a small bus rolling away, next a silver train crossing a river, and finally a large open shell holding a glowing pearl labeled hope. When the paint dried, she wrote the word mother in small letters across the bottom corner, smiling because claiming that name for herself felt stronger than any fancy title given by strangers. The artist helped her attach the light wooden frame, and when she held the kite against the wind, she felt it tug like an excited puppy ready to explore every hidden corner of the sky. A volunteer taught her a strong knot, and his calm instructions proved good teaching sounds like friendly chat, never sharp orders. The field filled quickly with rainbow shapes rising, and Miriam walked to an open patch where she let her kite go, gasping when it leaped upward as if it had been waiting its whole life to soar. Sunlight flashed upon its blue surface, and her painted story shimmered for all to see, a moving reminder that journeys do not need loud speeches if they carry honest colors upon the wind. A nearby boy lost control of his kite. Miriam showed him her string tricks, and together they saved the cloth, proving shared skills can lift any dream. The boy thanked her, calling her auntie with sweet respect, and the word felt like a warm handshake entering her pocket to stay, proof that kindness writes new names on our hearts every day. Music swelled as the band marched onto the grass, and the brass notes glittered through the air like spinning coins, turning heads toward the sky so everyone clapped for clouds and melodies alike. Food tents opened, scents of spicy potatoes and sweet sugarcane drifting on a breeze. Miriam ate slowly, savoring each bite while her kite danced high in the broad blue sky like a loyal guard dog. Across the crowd, she spotted Bilquis waving, holding a tiny baby wrapped in yellow. Miriam hurried over, marveling at the small fingers, and was invited to sing a lullaby to welcome the new life. Her voice, soft yet clear, drifted with the wind, and people nearby paused their chatter, letting the gentle song settle over them like feathers, proving quiet music can calm even the busiest field. When the baby yawned, Bilquis squeezed Miriam's hand and said the ocean had truly scrubbed sadness from her eyes, making them shine like polished shells ready to reflect sunrise. Feeling braver, Miriam recorded a short video of her kite and the lullaby on her phone, planning to send it to her son later so he could witness her bright corner of the world. The stall sold postcards printed with local scenes, and Miriam chose one showing the pier at sunset. She wrote a quick note. Even the sea remembers every petal. Wish you were here to see. She slipped the postcard into her bag, promising to post it after the festival, then returned to the field where contest had begun for highest flight and most creative artwork. Judges noticed her painted shell pearl and called her forward. Although bashful, she stepped up, explaining the symbols in simple words, and applause rose like soft surf washing over shy stones. They awarded her a small ribbon reading courage in color, and the paper circle felt lighter than a coin yet heavier than diamonds because it carried no terms like just or only before her name. Wind strengthened and kites strained higher. Miriam's kite pulled hard, and she let out more string, trusting the breeze the way a gardener trusts rain, knowing both can break or bloom flowers. A sudden gust snapped another flyer's line, sending a tiger-striped kite diving toward nearby tents. Miriam and two volunteers sprinted and caught it, returning it to a grateful elderly man. He thanked her by gifting a tiny carved whale keychain, saying sailors believe whales guide travelers home, and she accepted, attaching it to her suitcase zipper as a promise of future safe returns. Clouds drifted in like soft gray sheep, cooling the field. Organizers announced a break, so Miriam followed others to the shoreline where waves licked toes and laughter mixed with foamy spray. She folded her pants and waded, feeling cold water wrap ankles, and each splash carried away more residue of the wedding hall until her skin shivered fresh with freedom. A young reporter filming the festival asked for a quick interview. Miriam spoke about her first kite and how writing your own picture lifts your spirits higher than any borrowed design. The reporter smiled, saying viewers needed joyful stories, and promised to share the clip on the evening news. Miriam wondered if her son might catch it while scrolling after the long flight. Later she set driftwood letters spelling voice on wet sand and smiled as waves washed them away, knowing real voice stays inside the heart. Afternoon sun slanted gold. Officials called for reel in, and Miriam wound her kite string slowly, whispering thanks to the sky for carrying her story. She folded the kite with care, avoiding wet sand, and tucked it under her arm like a folded dream, waiting to open again whenever hope needed fresh wings. As crowds dispersed, she mailed a postcard, feeling the small thunk in the box echo inside her chest like a door clicking shut on yesterday's sorrow. At a seaside cafe, she ordered warm milk tea and wrote in her notebook about whales, pearl shells, and new lullaby friends, promising to show her garden children these pages one day. Her phone buzzed with a message from her son. Flight delayed. Thought of you when the band played our favorite tune. Love you, Mom. And tears blurred the screen until joy cleared them with a laugh. Miriam replied with a photo of her kite ribbon and typed, I am learning to fly too, adding a tiny shell to keep the words light and friendly. Stars blinked alive overhead as she walked back to the guest house, the ribbon pinned to her shawl fluttering like a torch guiding her through sweet salt air. Before sleeping, she placed the whale charm beside the pressed petal and letter, whispering goodnight to the sea as distant waves applauded her quiet courage, and the kite of her dreams rose inside a sturdy sky of sleep. Dawn on her third morning by the sea found Miriam standing at the wet edge of sand, holding the pale blue ribbon from her kite and feeling the sunrise spill gold across the water like a warm promise guiding her next step homeward. She tucked the ribbon into her journal, knowing paper and string could carry memories better than even the strongest suitcase because they folded to fit any corner of the heart. After tea with the guesthouse owner, who pressed fresh mango slices on her for road strength, she paid the bill, thanked him for kindness, and rolled her suitcase toward the small station where gulls perched on rusty lampposts like patient guides. The ticket clerk recognized her from festival news and grinned, saying the courage ribbon on her shawl had inspired other travelers to decorate their own bags with bright drawings instead of store labels. Miriam boarded the morning train to the city, finding a window seat that smelled of sun-warmed wood and faint mint, the same comforting mix her husband's old sweater always carried on winter walks. As the train rumbled forward, she opened her notebook and reread the letter to her son, checking every line once more to be sure it sounded like a bedtime story instead of a complaint list. Satisfied, she slipped the letter back into its envelope along with the pressed rose petal, then sealed it by tying the courage ribbon around the middle, making a small bow that looked like two wings touching. Across the aisle, a teenager practiced guitar chords, and when he stumbled, she whispered tips about slowing down and breathing between notes, advice she had once given her son during recorder lessons. The boy thanked her with a shy smile and strummed smoother, proving gentle help can tune both strings and spirits without raising a single voice. Fields raced past, painted bright green after last night's rain, and Miriam imagined each patch of rice waving goodbye, just as new friend had waved kites goodbye the afternoon before. At the midway stop, a vendor sold cinnamon buns still steaming. Their sweet smell floated through the carriage, and Miriam bought two, saving one in her purse for a future moment when kindness might be needed. When the conductor announced the city's main station, she gathered her things and felt her pulse quicken, not with fear but with eager wonder about how her story would meet her sons on the busy platform. She stepped onto the concrete and saw crowds flowing like many rivers, each person carrying suitcases, flowers, or sleepy children, and she reminded herself that every traveler is a chapter needing gentle reading. Near the taxi rank, she spotted Bilquis, waving the whale keychain, who explained she was sending a care box to her daughter and had hoped to see Miriam once more before their paths drifted apart. They hugged, exchanged phone numbers, and promised that postcards would fly like small brave kites between their doorsteps whenever the world felt too heavy. A bright taxi painted with mountain scenes whisked Miriam to her neighborhood, and she leaned out the window, greeting familiar neem trees whose leaves whispered, "Welcome home, brave gardener." She unlocked her gate, finding rose bushes blooming louder than ever, as though they had held a private festival in her honor, scattering scattered petals like confetti on the path. Inside, sunlight slanted across framed photos, and she added the new seaside sketch beside an old picture of her son building a sandcastle, smiling at how past and present now shared the same shelf without argument. She brewed mint tea, set the saved cinnamon bun on a plate, and placed the letter and bun into a small woven basket, deciding this simple gift would speak louder than any speech from a banquet stage. The doorbell rang mid-afternoon. Her son and new bride stood on the step, travel wrinkled but glowing, suitcases resting behind them like patient puppies. Before greetings could turn awkward, Miriam offered the basket and said, "For hungry travelers and hopeful hearts," using the same gentle tone she once used to present bedtime cocoa. Her son's eyes softened at the sight of the cinnamon bun, his childhood favorite, and he hugged her, whispering that the smell alone felt like coming home across every mile of sky. They entered, and Miriam led them to the kitchen where the teapot steamed, its gentle hiss smoothing edges of nerves the way tides smooth jagged shells. The bride admired garden photos on the fridge and asked Miriam to teach her which herbs kept mosquitoes away. The simple question bloomed like a bridge across what could have been an awkward gap. Over tea, Miriam told a short story about the kite festival, carefully choosing words a sixth grader could picture: bright colors, helpful hands, and a ribbon labeled courage riding the wind. The bride clapped, saying she wished she had seen the sky that day, and Miriam smiled, realizing an invitation to future trips might grow from that single spark. Her son noticed the whale keychain on the table and asked about its story. When Miriam finished, he nodded and said, "Sometimes strangers steer us back when we drift too far from familiar harbors." Taking a breath, Miriam slid the letter across the table, ribbon shining like sunrise, and said, "Read this when you have quiet time. It is my kite in paper form," he promised, placing the envelope gently inside his jacket pocket as though it were fragile glass, and Miriam felt a knot loosen in her chest, floating away like a balloon released. To lighten the mood, she opened the Courage Ribbon app on her phone, sent by festival organizers, and together they watched a short clip of her kite soaring, the lullaby carrying over cheers. Her son laughed, delight bright in his eyes, admitting he had seen the television interview while waiting in the airport lounge and felt proud the brave lady was his mother. The bride, eyes misty, asked to see the real kite. Miriam fetched it from the closet, and they spread it on the living room rug, tracing each painted symbol with gentle fingers. The bride pointed to the pearl label Hope and whispered that it reminded her of mothers everywhere who carry dreams safely inside even when waves crash loud outside. Together they hung the kite above the couch, letting its blue wings brighten the room, and Miriam noticed it looked a bit like a framed window opening onto a calm sky. Evening light glowed peach through curtains, and they cooked dinner as a team: spiced lentils, buttered corn, and garden salad, turning the kitchen into a small festival of chopping boards and laughter. As they ate, Miriam's son thanked her for every hidden task she had done for the wedding week, promising he would never again let busy noise drown out gentle voices that steady a family's heartbeat. Miriam accepted the words like cool rain after heat, storing them in the same pocket where her kite string once pressed, a pocket now lined with trust. Before bed, they planned a weekend visit back to the sea, agreeing loose shells and open skies would make perfect first family memories beyond reception halls and pose photographs. After they retired to the guest room, Miriam stepped onto the porch, inhaling night air heavy with jasmine, and whispered thanks to stars that had guided her journey from silence to song. She closed the door, feeling the house settle around her like safe wings, and knew that every good story needs both quiet chapters and soaring chapters, and tonight the pages finally rested together, stitched by courage, love, and a single pressed petal. Morning light filtered through the curtains, and Miriam woke early to the soft clang of mugs as her son prepared breakfast, a sound that once echoed through his college dorm videos and now filled her kitchen again with bright home notes. She stayed quiet at the doorway, watching him read the letter she had given, his brow folding first like paper being tested, and then smoothing as if a breeze had found its way across a still lake. When he finished, he traced the pressed petal taped inside, and tears glimmered on his lashes, reminding her of raindrops on rose leaves after a summer storm that never really harmed the flowers it touched. He turned, called her Amma instead of mother-in-law, and hugged her with both arms, whispering that he finally understood how silent love can shout louder than party microphones or rented fireworks. The bride joined them with sleepy eyes, wrapping her arms around them, so the three formed a small circle like a living wreath braided from apology, promise, and morning tea steam. Over buttered toast, they planned to host a thank-you lunch for the helpers who had set up the wedding, letting Miriam lead the menu because nobody knew spices and stories like she did. She chose simple dishes, lentil soup, garden salad, and honey cakes, explaining that plain food can still taste like a hug if stirred by steady hands and served with listening ears. Her son offered to print invitations titled Celebration of Quiet Heroes, and Miriam laughed, thinking of the many chairs she had adjusted while remaining invisible in that shining hall. Together they tidied the yard, stringing old lanterns between neem branches so colored circles of light drifted across the lawn like slow fireflies waiting for twilight applause. While pruning roses, Miriam found a blossom shaped almost like heart and pinned it near the ribbon on her shawl, deciding every symbol gains power when joined by living proof. At noon, neighbors arrived carrying pots of rice and trays of fried fish, and little children ran between benches singing a kite festival song they had seen on local news the night before. Miriam greeted each guest by name, determined that nobody would leave feeling unseen the way she had, and her own name floated back to her in cheerful echoes that warmed old bruises. She invited the planner who had rushed her at the wedding, and though surprise flickered across the woman's face, gratitude soon followed when Miriam poured her a cup of mint lemonade. People ate under shifting shade, and laughter rose like gentle surf. The bride's aunt, who once joked about mothers talking too much, now asked for Miriam's recipe book and promised to credit her at every picnic. After dishes were cleared, her son carried out a small wooden box he had painted sea blue, inside which lay the courage ribbon, the whale charm, and a tiny scroll labeled Community Library Fund. He announced they would start a seaside story shelf in Miriam's name, so travelers could trade tales the way she had traded magazines for poems, and applause rippled through folding chairs. Miriam blushed but accepted, imagining backpacks filling with borrowed hope, and thanked everyone with a voice that finally felt equal to its task, steady, clear, and heard. The bride then handed Miriam a framed print of the kite sketch, bordered decorated with tiny pearls, and on the lower edge they had etched in silver, Mother Gardener Guide. Tears returned, but this time they tasted sweet like ripe mango. She let them fall, thinking some seeds sprout best after a little rain softens their shells. Evening drifted in on orange clouds, and paper lanterns bloomed, turning the yard into a pocket galaxy where every gentle voice shone like a small star marking safe paths. The planner suggested Miriam share the speech she never gave, and with a deep breath she stood, unfolded the paper boat of words, and let it sail at last across attentive faces. She spoke about calling people by name, about listening between drumbeats, and about how love often whispers from kitchens and bus stops rather than grand stages. She paused, let silence settle like dew so every sentence could plant itself, and saw nods, smiles, even thoughtful frowns, proof that stories grow roots when given room. When she finished, applause rolled like a calm wave, not the roar of a storm but the steady hush that smooths sand, and she felt it soak into her bones in the nicest way. Her son stepped forward with an envelope of his own, placing it in her palm. Inside was a train ticket back to the seaside for 3 passengers, dated the next full moon weekend. He said they wanted to revisit the shore with her as guide, to meet bilquis and fly new kites, because good places deserve return journeys just as favorite songs deserve encores. Miriam nodded, heart humming, and imagined her kites soaring again beside 2 brand new ones decorated by hands that now understood how pictures could speak louder than titles. Guests departed under stars, leaving behind bowls scraped clean and benches scented with jasmine and spiced tea, while Miriam collected lanterns, each still warm with shared light. Inside, she placed the new framed kite on the mantel beside wedding photos she would soon rearrange so no one important lingered at the edge of the frame again. She taped her once silent speech above her writing desk as a reminder that stories must leave drawers to breathe, and beneath it she pinned a blank page titled Next Adventure. Before bed she walked the garden paths, petals brushing her ankles like soft applause, and she whispered to every bloom that tomorrow's tasks would start with gratitude, not worry. In the moonlit kitchen, she sliced the saved honey cake, wrapping pieces for the night guard, the postman, and the shy neighbor, spreading the party beyond the gate just as waves carry gifts beyond shore. She paused by the phone, dialing Bilquist to share the day's news, and laughed when the older woman cheered that the whale charm had done its work faster than any lighthouse. Miriam then wrote a short entry in her journal. There is power in leaving, but there is greater power in returning whole signed, not just the mother-in-law but Miriam, Frenikites. Upstairs, her son and bride whispered plans about hanging string lights in the garden year-round, and the low murmur felt like a lullaby floating through floorboards to cradle her dreams. She set the journal on her bedside, slipped the roseheart bloom into water, and watched it open wider even in the dark, evidence that quiet rooms can still host bright miracles. Lying down, she replayed the wedding hall in her mind, but this time she edited the memory. She walked out proudly, not unseen, because she now stood inside every bright sequel that followed. She imagined tomorrow's breakfast where her name would fly across the table like a friendly kite string, and she smiled, knowing she would respond with equal warmth and maybe an extra spoon of jam. The night breeze carried faint music from a distant celebration, yet Miriam felt no sting of exclusion, only joy that parties can bloom anywhere hearts open wide enough to include passing strangers. With eyes closing, she thanked the journey that had led her from silent departure to sung welcome, and drifted to sleep sure the world would now call her by many true names, each one spoken with care.